Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Good morning. We are still awaiting our speakers to join. There is a bit of a technical glitch. Sorry. We will start very soon. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Nadia.
Hi, how are you?
Asana, you're muted.
Hi, Professor Nazia. Sorry.
No
Hi,
worries.
everyone. Um, Very welcome. We are just giving a few more minutes for everybody to join. Hopefully, we'll start in at 11:05.
Okay, great. Did
Thank you for joining. I hope Sabuhi is also joining soon. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Hi, Sabuhi. Thanks for joining. Um, I think she has some connection issues.
Hello, hi.
Hi, can you
Hello.
hear us?
Yes,
Yeah,
hi.
thanks for joining.
You're welcome.
We're giving a couple of more minutes for people to join, so we'll start in 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hi. Sorry about that.
Okay, but is everything okay with you with the connections? Yeah.
Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Um, Maybe we can start with introductions. Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thanks for joining us this morning. Welcome to our last webinar of the year under the UNESCO Chair webinar series. And thank you for your support throughout this year. It has been a very productive and efficient year in terms of the webinars and the knowledge dissemination activities that we are uh, progressing. As you might remember, the chair was established in 2021 under the chair under Professor Dina Dayala's leadership. This year, the chair is renewed for another 4 years with Dr. Yasemin Akhtas as the co-chair. Or our research partners and our team members. You might have seen us in several of our previous webinars as well. And during the last 4 years, we have delivered about 40 webinars, 8 short courses, and 1 global symposium, and around 4,000 people from different parts of the world have joined and participated in several of these webinars. And we plan to continue our efforts in the coming years. And today's webinar, before getting to today's webinar, I would like to just brush upon what we delivered in the past year, about 11 webinars on different aspects and different themes that are the key priorities of the chair. And we hope to expand on the current themes, as you see here, further into multi-hazard resilience and also holistic system resilience, integrating physical and social aspects of resilience. We will be updating our upcoming webinars on our website very soon, so please stay tuned. Now we come to our today's webinar about the Cambridge co-creation approach, tools for system change and impact. I'm very happy to have Professor Nazia Habib and Ms. Sabuhi Essa with us to talk about their approaches for bringing together diverse knowledge and analyze complex systems to improve robust and inclusive decision making. So I hope they will be explaining about their methods in great detail. I will leave it to them. Just to introduce, it's my great pleasure to introduce the speakers. Professor Habib is a founder and director of the Center for Resilience and Sustainable Development at University of Cambridge. Thank you for accepting our invitation and delivering this webinar for our audience. And she works both at the Department of Engineering and at the Department of Land Economy. She was trained at Oxford and Cambridge and has dedicated her career and scholarship to develop action research methodologies that will harness collective intelligence for greater resilience to the cohesive decision-making process. And she has contributed more than 57 countries and advised over 20 governments on sustainable development and climate change related policy. And she was recognized on the Commonwealth Day in 2023 by the King of England at the Buckingham Palace for her research on the Commonwealth small state. And she's also set up the world's first food system leadership academy for the North Africa and Near East region with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Prior to founding CRSD, and she was also a founding university lecturer at Cambridge, and she has been awarded several research grants, including the Newton Fellowships and Commonwealth Scholarships. And she's also an honorary research professor at Asia Europe Institute at the University of Malaya. And we are very happy to have you, Professor Habib. And we are also excited to speak and engage with Ms. Sabuhi Essa. She is a PhD student with Professor Habib, and she specializes in turning complex system interdependencies into integrated solutions for high-risk regions by utilizing systems thinking and collective action methods. And global experience, and her experience spans across Europe, Asia, and East Africa, with demonstrated expertise in facilitation, evidence-based planning, and multi-stakeholder engagement. I will not hold you long. I pass the platform to Professor Nazia to take up, and please carry on with the presentation. Thank you very much, both Professor Habib and Sabuhi.
Thank you so much, Hasana, and thank you for your patience to actually get us all organized in this platform. So I don't know if it's possible to see, know how many people. So I see there are about 28 participants, which is wonderful. And you have a chat over there on your side. So we like to make our presentations and dialogue as interactive as possible. So I don't know if the chat is enabled already, so students or participants can react to our discussion. That would be the most ideal way to use the time.
Yes. Yes,
Great.
so we can, the participants are able to use the chat and the Q&A function. And if at any point, if anybody wants to speak, unmute themselves and speak, that is also possible, but just let us know by raising your hand or just leaving a message in the chat so that we can enable the function for you. So please, if you prefer, we could encourage everybody to keep engaging with your talk as we progress through the chat and the Q&A. So maybe specific questions can be placed in the Q&A, but if it's an interaction or a comment, they can also use the chat. So yeah, it's very good that that's the platform and the format you prefer. Thank you.
Wonderful. Now could you tell us a bit of because we cannot see our audience and it's useful for us to also map the audience. Are we looking at mainly students from UCL? What are the demographic behind the scene?
Okay. We should also let you know that our colleague who usually handles with the registration, unfortunately, is not with us today. He's on annual leaves. So at the moment, I'm unable to give this information, but may I ask the participants to just leave a line in the chat about their whereabouts. So are you an academic? Are you a student? Are you from the industry? That would be very helpful to then progress the session today.
Thank you. Yes,
Thank
thank you, participants, because that way we can ensure that what we are speaking is relevant to your background. Because co-creation really is about knowing the other as much as we can and appreciating the other as much as we can. And we cannot appreciate unless we know who you are. Now you know who we are a great deal, and we will tell you more about who we are. And I think you need to connect the science and the scholar and the scholarship in a seamless way. And that's my philosophy of change in this academic version that I'm going to present to you. So I'm going to share my slide with an assumption that it shows up, and then we can do the slideshow from here. Can you see the slide? Great. So as Hasana said, I am a professor here at Cambridge University. And originally, as you can see, that many of my work is actually driven by the keywords in the resilience and sustainable development. So I ended up setting up a whole center to better understand what they mean, and which I will deliver not just by the theoretical work that we do, we also have developed methods and practices that Sabui, one of our star students, is going to take you through. And the three critical ideas that I want to leave you at the end is the context matters. And that's why I want to know who you are. And typically when we do this in Cambridge, I actually do not do webinar function like the way typically done in a professional context, because I think there are room for that webinar functions when it is a professional where the speaker doesn't want to be engaging with the participants in the same way that we do in academic scholarships placing. And it's not a criticism, it's just our approach to when we are co-creating, we're all in the same platform. And because of doing that, the context within which individuals come to that co-creation environment in the method, they're able to speak directly with each other. And that is very important part of the context I want to outline from the beginning, because rest of the conversation will hopefully then make more sense. The competitions is also the second keyword that I would like to have you appreciate, because competitions are everywhere, whether you like it or not. That's just a human evolutionary biology will also suggest that how we have evolved into a human being is that we also in the womb of our mothers had to compete with the other genomes before we got to become who we are. So competition is actually an important reality that we need to appreciate. And that is where the co-creation science that I'm dedicating my life to is about making those reality an accepted factor. The next one is the co-creation, which is again something that you see on a daily basis everywhere, where we have to make decisions in a consultative way. The more decisions are made in a consultative way, the more reception we see from the other side, as they, to what extent they believe, they trust, and they can depend on the decision that's get made. So the third key variable is the co-creation. Again, appreciating that as a normal pathway for a human to engage with others is actually to think this together. And coexistence, that's basically us living in the planet together with all the other planetary and now non-planetary reality, which is where we'll be more and more looking into coexisting with robots and AIs and God knows what next, right? And these are the four factors that I think is critical ideas that I would like to leave you with by telling you the stories of how science gets developed by scientists. And I believe what I have engaged in Cambridge University to develop as a co-creation science is truly coming from the root of this picture. Now, if you were in a webinar, and if Hasana, you're keeping track, I would like to know how many of you are seeing a rabbit first time you looked at this, and how many of you are seeing a duck? Can Asana just give me a shout out what you see once people chatted in?
We are getting more ducks.
Uh-huh.
3-1, 4-1.
Uh-huh. Excellent. So this is a very old image. You can go on to Wikimedia and read more about this. But let me just tell you my takeaway on this based on the psychological research that has been done using this. You tend to see more ducks if you have grew up seeing a lot of ducks around your environment. You tend to see more rabbits if you have grown in an environment where more rabbits were available. So when this is done, and I have done it many, many times, and I do not know your face behind the screen, but if many of you are coming from, Western dominant environment where you tend to have a lot of Peter Rabbit books, a lot of exposure to rabbits, so on and so forth, you will immediately see it is a rabbit with the, with this ears down. But again, if you tend to come mainly from riverine areas of the country, whether it's Western or Asian or African, you have seen lots of duck quacking around, you tend to immediately see a duck. There are also exposure when people travel a lot and tend to come from a little bit of a more versatile background, they tend to see duck and rabbit in a split second by blinking because the brain readjusts. This is called bias. And the biases are very much intertwined with our lived experience. The way we grow up, the way we have seen our environment around us, frames that mental model through which we see things. And this is nothing wrong in a human characteristic. And I want to make this point very, very carefully here because, as I said from the beginning, context is one of my primary key variables that I would like to leave you with. Trying to understand the context, meaning that you need to understand the biases that you have, whether you're a scientist, whether you're a politician, whether you're an engineer or an interest group leader, an union leader. We all have some kind of biases that we have no control over. And there are biases that we have control over, which is when you understand that you have a bias, you can use your mental model to actually adjust those biases. And that's where you see the extremist ideas, the formation of groups who are violent, and they have very distinctive way of expressing those biases in the society, which can end up creating terror to the other. And the context within which they have developed those kind of practices is actually where the keywords of collaboration and collaboration comes in. Because from the very early on of a childhood, studies have found that if you actually interact with the child with lots of differentiated application tools and games and X, Y, and Z that comes around in child's life, playfully, you can actually start to create a very flexible mindset. And that flexible mindset can be something that even if you are biased, you are able to appreciate and see the other because of the way the brain has evolved and are evolving. So the context understanding for scientists, as we are, is also something that we often get very terrified about, to acknowledge who we are, where we come from. And I'm going to tell you where I come from. And you will see the story of my beginning is actually a story that also informs the way I understand science. And even the scientists, the brightest mathematicians like Einstein, who would say that his background and his political experience during the era that he was alive formed the way he understood the context within which he was doing his discovery of relativity. And that relativity is very true even for the relativity that we're going to discuss today among each other as a human being. And this is where the context matters. The way my university, Cambridge University, is formed and shaped is very different than rest of the other universities in the world, because we're the third oldest university and one of the top universities, top 3 universities in the world. The psychology of the university in and of itself and the people who are in that university are very different than other universities. And I have worked at Harvard, Cambridge, and then also worked in the private sector and United Nations. Institutional psychology matters when it comes to biases and when it comes to forming our context. And realizing the history of an institution, understanding where the institution has come from, either will make you a maverick, you will be fearless and you can break through, or will make you a timid individuals because you're afraid of the consequences that it will have. And you can think of many situations in today's world where even a country leader can dominate the whole population psychology, and it will make you timid to make decisions. Contrary to that, say, for example, in Cambridge, if I think about the Nobel laureates, the notable alumni, including Darwin, Alan Turing, Isaac Newton, you suddenly feel you're walking on the footsteps of giants. And you get to be brave and you can break through things. That psychology is not a bragging right. That psychology is actually an important factor analysis for scientists to realize what they're developing and for whom they're developing. Now, the for whom question for me is this, because I come from Bangladesh. I grew up walking in flood water to go to my school. I grew up with massive population and knowing that once it was told in 1970s by Henry Kissinger that Bangladesh is a bottomless basket, which basically means no matter how much food you put into these people's belly, they will always run out of it because it's bottomless. Clear and simple. Infrastructure and psychology put together, that was the statement. Powerful statement. That powerful statement has framed my psychology very young age to better understand how countries feed themselves. So many of my early works are actually in food security, which then ended up thinking into, even if there is a plenty of food, how can we not feed ourselves with all the things that we know that are going to work? So that introduced me to food systems. So when I was at Harvard University doing my postdoc, I very much got involved in understanding the genetically modified crops and the political reality behind the scene from the Western understanding of genome structures and the reality in my own country and other countries where food are needed, as the climate change impact was making it harder for food production to be sustainable. Not to mention the politics of the country or any countries also dictate how the food gets distributed between the price chain. So the price chain is a part of the value chain where price differentiation makes some type of food accessible to one part of the society versus the other part of the society. Again, these are the context within which I, as a scientist, have developed the understanding of the context within which we need to make decisions. Which brings me to the next slide. This is my group, and I am very fortunate to actually find professionals and experts and scholars to join me in the journey of developing this Center for Resilience and Sustainable Development. And we realize that it isn't through theory or just quantitative data or qualitative interviews. We can get through the complexity of the current world to actually make better decisions. We need a new science and a new approach of co-creation. The journey that I started about 9, coming up to 10 years ago in Cambridge, it was just a mere research program, which then grew up to become a whole research center. And the beginning of the journey was something where people would come up and say, Nazia, I don't understand what you're doing. It doesn't fit with social science. It is not engineering. What are you doing? And the point of when you get asked over and over what you're doing, don't give up. Because when you know that we are all biased and we're framed through the mindset of something that we know, and if the model doesn't fit, we get uncomfortable. And being uncomfortable within yourself and within the community where you're forming a new approach is actually a lived reality of any scientist. And that's why you do read about scientists' struggles when they're trying to do something different. And that is very important, that I also want to depart with you, because the future that we are going into, we need to be uncomfortable to actually better, take advantage of the science and the people around us, and depend more on each other, less than the technology that will be coming out. And then Shabui will be taking you through that journey, because she is someone who comes with a civil engineering background to demonstrate how technological solution is not enough to withstand climate change crisis, political crisis, geopolitical rush that happens in the real world. Scientists who hide behind that we are only creating objective inputs and objective outputs are actually making it difficult for the real world people to make decisions based on the scientific outcomes. So the reality for us is to understand the context, competitions, because now I will introduce you to the competitions that we go through, because we live in a silo. And the silo-based thinking allows us to be very competitive into the way we work around each other. So the first part of competition is actually within the scholarship, how we develop science. So there is basic research. This is where majority of us as the scientists sit in. We are motivated by advancing scientific understanding. We're committed to the intellectual inquiry. We are working on a theoretical foundation. We take other theories and we build on it, or we pull it apart. We approach the centralized version of the theory and try to create a generalized understanding so that it creates the essence, the fundamental of that science. And of course, our career is connected with our academic peer-reviewed paper and the scientific community's appreciation of what we're doing. The research culture is actually quite traditional if you think about this. But when I entered into this journey of becoming an academic, I was not satisfied. I was not getting the right kind of excitement to actually just do basic research, because many of the giants who came before me have actually done tremendous work in the field of very different type of science. And I felt like, what else can I add to this? Because ultimately the question I'm asking is not a theoretical question. I want to understand how we can feed each other successfully and sustainably to be alive. Very basic question. And understanding the theory of inequality and poverty and distribution and redistribution rights were useful, but was not good enough. So I entered into action research. Now, action research is a type of research culture that was popularized around the 80s. It died out and then it started to come back again. And I did not just go into action research for advancing the scientific knowledge. I realized that we, as scientists, especially those of us in the social science area, have not learned how to do iterative experiments, which is basically means that you do not stop in a randomized control trial or just one of large-scale panel data analysis or an interview, but actually find a way to do more of the same thing over and over with a group of people, so you can actually advance your basic understanding of what is working, what is not working, and how we can make things work. And the question of how is actually collective intelligence. That is the knowledge which combines the scientific knowledge with lived experience and the basic appreciation that we all have some kind of contextual biases. And that appreciation will then unlock the ability to actually take peer review materials with not peer reviewed materials, which is storytelling or generalized understanding of why politics is not, working in certain context. This action research is very different from consulting because consulting is client-driven, whereas action research is not client-driven. It is driven by theory and human needs. And once you are applying both theory and human needs, you're driving this, advancing a scientific knowledge by problem solving, then it becomes an action research. And action research is something that is core to the co-creation laboratory approach that I have developed in Cambridge. And to summarize this whole thing that I just shared about myself, the basic understanding, the context, and the concepts, it basically means how do you actually get together and understand two critical variables? One is the visible power, and the other one is the invisible power. And what is power? If someone can put something out in your chat box, I would like to hear some answers. Sana, do we have any response? What is power?
Not yet. We do have one question in the Q&A and a hands up, but we can take them when you wish to take the Q&A or as we go.
We can take the Q&A because I'm entering into the
Okay.
next. Yeah.
Would you like to talk this yourself, Shmuel, or can I read this out? So the question is how the idea of co-creation can support resolution problems of poverty and improvement social and economic well-being of poor and low socioeconomic groups of population. Thanks, Shmuel.
Well, that's a great question. I think that question should be answered at the end of the presentation because I think towards the end you should have the answer. And if we haven't answered it, then we shall reflect again.
Yeah.
But I believe Sabuhi will give you a practical example of how that can be done.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Nazia. And thank you, Shmuel, for the question. We have some answers for the question about power.
Yep.
So it's a one-word, control is an answer. There's another answer that says having more influence or privilege than others and the ability to use it to make decisions. There's power is having control over how resources are distributed. Yeah, that's as much as we have for now.
Yeah, no, those are perfect. So yes,
Yeah.
just the way the power lights up a room and we can see better, that's exactly the way the definition of power needs to be understood. So you can see better who is controlling what, who is holding the resource and who is not getting the resource. Much of this is actually so intertwined in the way the government, the businesses, and the society works that we often forget to ask the question is what is a visible power and what are the invisible powers? And you're right, the visible powers are often can be understood by the asset allocation that we can see through normal economic activities, the price, how high the price is for organic goods versus who gets to buy the organic good is one interesting way of showing who has power. Taxation policies, regressive, progressive tax in different parts of the world also is an interesting way of visualizing who gets to use that taxation policies to empower them. or who doesn't, and how it does redistributes the power, i.e., regressive policies can be quite useful to redistribute wealth from one part of the society to the other. Now, the invisible power is the tricky one. The invisible power is where, again, the context comes back. The biases come back. Because oftentimes, those invisible power are the power that social psychologists would talk and they will research and they will practice to empower each others. And the empowerment of each other is actually in the word of invisible power when we do not understand why collective or why an individual or why one part of the society is behaving very differently towards the other part of the society. Until their extreme behavior, like terrorist activities or racial outcry, those invisible powers operate in fashions that often feels they are institutionalized or they are organic as a matter of time just passing by, and your file for your application is not moving forward. Your grant runs out and you are still stuck in the admin process. Those are invisible powers, often can be covert and can be quite damaging from social psychology point of view. And the invisible power is what I spend a lot of time trying to understand how we can reduce the invisible power, not to make them visible, but to actually control them. So the control of that invisible power equates to the visible power become more accessible by majority of the population. So the institutional economics are actually a group, part of economic scholarship. The scholars like Douglas North and Ostroms and others have spent huge amount of time trying to understand collective action, what can be done through institutionalizing different parts of the society so that that informal economy where the invisible power lies can be controlled, and that can be within reach for majority of the population. And part of that is these kind of questions you can ask when you are doing this complex system analysis to understand the power, is that how underlying power structure interacts with the dynamic system behavior. Why intervention success or fail over time? Think about it from the time perspective. How change can be designed through multi-actor process. Who else should be in the conversation in this kind of analysis? And if you are not including, say, gender or children or youth, are we being fair to the rest of it who does not have the visible power in the structure? So the stakeholder analysis is a big part of the invisible power analysis. How individuals and institutions adapt to limited resource. So who goes bankrupt when there is a price hike in oil or gas or fossil fuel or food market? That's our part of the way to think about the active participants' experience with the invisible power. So the way to then break this down means that it's a transdisciplinary exercise, because each of these disciplines that are outlined here are degree programs that we study in universities. There's a huge competition in academia for funding, for grants, for students to actually study each of them. One of the campaign that I am big time involved here is that we need to break the silo-based thinking, especially when it comes to postgraduate level. There is definitely room and time and need for expert knowledge in economics, politics, systems, psychology, geography. But then as an engineer, you should not be only studying engineering, or as a physicist, you should not be only studying physics. You also need to study all of this, especially in a postgraduate degree where you tend to have your degrees programmed to align you with the job market readiness. And when you're in a job market readiness mindset, you soon become employee or a startup owner or an entrepreneur. You're making decisions. And when you're making decisions, the cascade effect of this decision are the users of your service or your goods. Those users and you are then in a complete connection of how money exchanges or asset exchanges, how you are controlling or not controlling the power, how the leakages are happening in the system, and you're taking, the system is allowing different decisions to be made, tax avoidance, tax giving, price controlling, price sharing, attitudes, behavior that we see in the society, male versus female, young versus old, intergenerational, extra-generational, intercultural, that's part of the psychology and the culture. And the place and location in and of itself also will dictate how we think about our problems, like the duck and a rabbit, right? So those are critical insights that each of these disciplinary silos have created well before we started our journey in education, in academia. And there are a lot of those theories are no longer necessary or needed only within their own silo. They're actually much more powerful if you are allowed and able and capable to combine them to make a better decision. And that decisions are not only by yourself, actually, it's together with others. And that's why this current recent geopolitics that I'm going to run through very quickly will illustrate only if we are co-created our decision, should we even had gone to the war? Did we not know that Strait of Hormuz from geographical studies done back in the 70s and 80s during the Cold War era, that is actually a pinch point, and having a physical geographical control on that pinch point always made Iran a much powerful country despite its size and its all the other political complaints that we know as a neoliberal parts of the world. And that pinch point debate could have been actually elevated without going into a war and actually causing destruction that the rest of the world has faced, because 30% of the fossil fuel trade happens through that. And look who are the basic consumer of that. Developing countries. 40% of those population who live in the whole wide world are dependent on fossil fuel. 3%, about 3% of their GDP are actually spent on fossil fuel. And that is a recent data from 2024. So when that means that the price of fuel has gone up, that 3% on those poor countries have now gone into 6 and 10, and some countries have been 15%. And guess what happens with that? Cascade effect. Geopolitics has role in daily life, and we do not need to teach geopolitics separate from food engineering and food sustainability or transportation fuel. They need to be combined so that we can better understand how pricing of one commodity, like fossil fuel, has to connect with food price, because the fertilizers, 70% of them, are actually dependent on the fossil fuel. And this is the reality of connected world, where context, connections, and the competition for resources on a daily basis changes your personal experience. And I myself actually was in Bangladesh during the first 2 weeks of the war, and I had literally woken up all of that 2 weeks at 5 o'clock in the morning with our driver to sit in the pump to get the allocated rationed fossil, the gasoline that we needed for our day. And we were basically rationed to the point that the war is going to cripple the rest of the country's economy. And it almost felt like that we were about to be shut down in the Bangladesh. Now, the psychology is actually quite interesting here. So this is an interesting green car, as you can see, and there has been studies done. So that was a negative psychology. Now let's look at the positive psychology. This is a very interesting study done where green car consumers have actually told that they actually now go more times to the grocery stores to buy their produce. They use less lists to actually think about what they have to buy, because it's so easy to go to the grocery shop, and they do not feel guilty about all the trips that they have to take. The guilt is an important word in psychology, and guilt is an important word in sustainability, which we do not often talk about, because the less guilt is, of course, means that your human welfare and well-being has improved. Wonderful. But those batteries that are used, lithium, cobalt, and ions, not necessarily are actually extracted from the most humanitarian way. And we know many case studies are separately done by geographers and economists. What are the cascading effect they have in the local community? So in one hand, this is where the competition thinking is very important. We're not blaming, but we're trying to understand that one group of the society feeling welfare by having green car does not necessarily directly changes the welfare of the other part of the society unless there is a systems level interconnection, unless there's a system level co-creation of a system where those cobalt and the mining operations are also governed from the same well-being philosophy, that those miners also have to feel well served and well paid for. And these are economist jobs that we do as our laboratory or panel data analysis. So those data then comes into my laboratory. And this is where now I bring you to Cambridge Co-Creation Lab. And after that, I will hand over to Sabui. Any questions so far?
No more questions in the Q&A, but there was one person with a raised hand.
Sure.
But they have since removed. But you
I
can
see.
unmute and talk, Christine, if you would wish. Thanks for.
You can open your screen as well.
Yeah, please. I'm not sure if this was, a raise hand by mistake, but I hope you have something to share. No. I'm thinking not. Please
You
feel
can type the question, Christine.
if you wish, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, so let's get into the definition of co-creation, what I have since then developed. The key words are the committed to share risks and resource together to generate useful knowledge for reliable decision making within time and budget. All of those words are actually equally important when you think about this. And they're so equally important. There are risk analysis, risk matrix for majority of the things that we ever think about. There's this group of scholars, scientists, and experts sitting out there. They're working on risk measurements. Resource allocation, also something that are widely available if you think about it. Data collection, quite a lot of secondary materials are out there. It is the useful knowledge that is the bit that is not often found in secondary literature, because whose useful knowledge are we really thinking to bring together? And for whom the knowledge will be useful? That's actually a tricky question. And that's where the lived experience part, the field work, the participatory research methodologies that we teach to our students are actually very important. But there is a little problem in there as well, because the useful knowledge collection is actually very expensive and time consuming. So the grant runs out, budget runs out, your time runs out before you manage to actually collect all the useful knowledge that you need to create reliable decision making. And the reliable decision is also a very important set of keywords there. Reliable for whom? Is it the minister or the bureaucrat, or is it the business that they have to actually rely on that decision, or is it the public? So differentiating the user of the decision making and the changing of the guard, i.e. handing over the evidence to that decision maker, in and of itself is actually also time consuming and budget constraint. So co-creation requires us to be cognizant of that complex reality, to know where the secondary materials are, what kind of time and budget we have, and how we are going to make those data to fit together to make useful knowledge and reliable evidence for decision making. And that is not a job of one person, or that is not even possible by one person to do it alone. They have to co-create. And this is where the need for a co-creation approach emerges, because no one individual or institution have all the knowledge. And system thinking is all about trying to piece together different parts of the actions to create a condition within which the action and the condition can satisfy the input and output variables need to work together. And that's what we call system. And therefore, the CRSD, my research center, we developed our own inquiry approach. And this is an approach that I taught to Sabui, to our students, and they are using this methodological approach to contract and expand as they collect different kind of evidence and inform themselves together with the participants who are part of the useful knowledge creation and the parties who are the reliable decision maker. Each of the project that we do, now I will show you, will have this level of conceptualizations, which is basically primary and secondary literature review, as academics tend to do. Boundary conditioning is the second activity where you actually define the boundary, but physically and also conceptually. That's the problem question that needs to be addressed. Stakeholder analysis, these are the 3 steps that has to be done before you enter into the laboratory. And this is an iterative process. And you will see Sabui has done that iterative process as she was trying to gather evidence for her PhD thesis. And the reason we do that, before I move on, and as she will talk about this past, present, and future, which are basically where the bottlenecks are that happens from the past actions. Present is where a lot of the surprises is. You suddenly enter a room and you find a minister who you were not expecting. A surprise. That could be a good or bad thing, depending on the dependency of the politics that you are on. And the path dependency is what also dictates the future of where you want to go with your collective intelligence or decision making. And part of that process is not one-off. And you still have to give yourself enough time to actually do that process iteratively using one of the methods that we developed in the laboratory. So in Cambridge Co-Creation Laboratory, think about a lab in any parts of the world. You can get your blood, your spit, or any other fluid from your body tested, right? And to test different types of fluid, you have different kind of methods and chemicals that pull together to actually run the test. So we have developed in our laboratory environment modular methods that can be add on or taken off as you are trying to find out what is causing the challenge within a system to deliver the best outcome. In Sabui's case, it is the civil engineering infrastructure that she's very much interested, which are failing the climate change shocks that are happening in the Himalaya region. And to understand the uncertainty, the unavailability and unavoidable reality, she had to grapple as a part of our student to understand the complexity, understand how finance works, how innovation diffusion theory works, how governance works. So it is a requirement in a co-creation laboratory approach for a student to actually have a much broader understanding of the variables that they will have to engage with when they are actually in the fieldwork. So yes, this is another reason why transdisciplinary scholarship is hard. And it is not a cup of tea for everyone because it requires a huge amount of openness in mind and as much as openness in books and literatures. And so we can tell her firsthand experience trying to do that in her PhD thesis. So very quickly, I'll finish up after this and hand it over, is that the whole theory of change that we have, that we are engaged in Cambridge to do it together really ends up in the key word, which is the science and practice should not be sitting outside anymore. That scientists do their lab job and practitioners do their field job. They have to be brought together through action research. And the way they need to be brought together with the boundary conditions, which are different because we are dictated by grants and the culture of objective finding, whereas consulting or a professional world is dependent on the client-driven need, are actually not too unequal when you think about the amount of knowledge. And now with the era of AI, knowledge is at our fingerprint. What is missing is this inequality in the boundary conditioning. And that's why you have that symbol, that the inequality of the boundary conditioning needs to be eroded in a way that action research should become the frontline approach to all postgraduate students, because, as I said, they're very close to stepping out of the university into the real world, when their decisions will have tremendous amount of cascading effect in the majority of the population whom they never even met, because we live in a virtual world. And the more and more we realize that complexity, the better scholar we can be and better practitioner we can become. And stakeholder analysis is the other bit of the puzzle that I always inspire my students to think about. Who have I left out in that invisible power diagram? And what information and insight are out there in other disciplines, in geography, anthropology? Go up, look it up, ask ChatGPT, whoever you can ask for it, because you know what? It's no longer a hidden secret that we're not doing a good job. Okay? And therefore, once we have managed to pull some of these materials together, it's the next thing is to sit together with other human beings and engage in outcome definition, design, and delivery planning to create the progress report that we all can back. And therefore, we are committed to share our risk and resource for the outcome. It's no longer that expert consultants come in with no skin in the game, walk away, and leave the recommendation, hand it over to third party who themselves, A, did not have the first-hand experience because they are just a conveyor belt of the decision process, or have not actually have vested interest in making the decisions because they're in a rotating job. The job will move. So the only way to break through that is not to blame, but to bring more voices, more lived experience with both quantitative and qualitative evidence that are out there. And we know how to crunch number. We know how to formulate projections. We know how to take percentiles and actually do factor analysis with informal and imperfect information. We know all of that. So the next thing that we need to do a better job at is to make invisible power visible through engaging and understanding the lived experience and quantifying and qualifying that in the matrix of data that is required to develop a better design. And that is a co-created design, again, with those people who are often left out from the design making. And this is my last slide, because this is the institutional feasibility study, an important framework that brings all of the co-creation laboratory operations together, where we need to better understand institutional capacity, which are formed with those 4 critical variables that institutionalists, economists, political scientists always been working on. What are the knowledge, how it is created, what's the regulations, where is the money, and how the coordination works. Any of these elements are not in sync will create governance capability questionable. And you see that tons and tons of reports, case studies, and analysis out there. Resource availability is a big part of the governing of the resource, the control, the power that we spoke about. Nodality or information, who holds information, is an invisible power. Often you do not know until you actually get them in an environment where you have to share information. Co-creation is a very big part of that puzzle. Authority, we often know who has the authority. Treasure is, again, something that is not always visible, who has that treasury relationships or engagements in an organization or an union. And obviously, organizational design in and of itself is resource. Are you a private company? Are you a charity? Are you a foundation? That is where the resource definition gets together as to how you govern your resource. And the last one is the target belief. And that's the bias bit that I introduced at the beginning. Who do we think is credible? What is legitimate? How do you hold somebody culpable when they become too greedy? Or how do we trust each other? And all of this are part of our mental model, the building block that we have grew up with. Again, I said, please do not take bias as a negative thing. Acknowledge it as it is an air that we have to live within to survive. With the biases, we become human. But it is the biases that when it goes out of control, we become just a little bit less of human. So I finish over here because I think Sabui will show you how this theory of change can be applied and actually take it to action research framework. So over to you, Sabui. Before I hand over to Sabui, any questions?
Thank you so much, Professor Nazia. This is, I mean, it's actually blowing my mind in the sense that it's not the um, regular nature of a technical webinar that we are used to, and it's probing and insisting us to think beyond our usual boundaries. There are a lot of questions that are in my mind, but I can keep them for our the Q&A at the end. I'm just checking the chat. No, there is a comment appreciating your presentation from Marina. I understand she is also a research lead, director at the Living Cities Action Research Institute. They work on urban development and strengthening social resilience, sustainability through community engagement and co-creation. If you would like to talk, I'm very happy to open your mic. Let me see if I can do that.
And also, participants, Asana is going to share with me the participants' contacts so that we can afterward can stay in connection. So feel free to also ask your question later.
Yeah. Just to check again with Marina, if you wish to unmute and speak, you're very welcome. In the meantime, if I could ask, it might be just pure ignorance. So when you say this invisible powers, is it the things that probably influence the decision making and ultimately what really gets done in a situation, which are beyond written laws, written agreements, or things like that are more visible? So are we meaning things that are like cultural uh, norms, or things like um, any ethical issues, unwritten rules, like say for instance in a country like in our context it might be patriarchy, for instance. Are we talking about these as invisible powers?
Yes, yes. So
Okay.
very much so. And those of you are not studying social science theory of power, one of the theory Foucault is a very you may look up his book, but it's very hard to read. Basically, his theory is that power recreates power. So if you come from, say, a royal family, you will be vested with that royal family attitudes, behavior, and your interaction with the elites. It's invisible to them because they're part and parcel of that reality. Similarly, you can think about patriarchal society. Without you thinking beyond the regime, it's not written that all the land should, even if you have a land rights given to women in many of the countries, you will, and in India is a very big example. There has been studies shown that even when the land reform rights came into actions, female siblings will still ask for permission from the male siblings whether they are allowed to actually take on that land that was by law should be theirs. And that's that's an invisible power that is still left in the hand of the male counterpart of the siblings. And that is invisible power. Recognizing that if you're entering that condition as a researcher looking at women empowerment, if you do not ask that question as that, are you asking your elder brother for permission? Because you are now aware about that bias, which is part of their culture. So we're not using it as a negative, but we're reconfirming that bias exists. And that bias then, when expressed collectively, no one feels like, oh, I am the weakest one. I'm the only one who's asking for permission. You actually neutralize the bias. And therefore, you can go to the next level of conversation is to what needs to happen should you not only have to always ask for permission from your
I think your screen is frozen, Professor Nazia. Is it same for everybody?
System as
Oh,
much as
sorry. Yeah, you're
it's a
back. We
psychological.
missed you for a bit. Yeah.
Okay, so the next bit of the question is where I think Sabui can also touch on is that what needs to happen is a question that is very important for engineers because they're always trying to make things work. Instead of
Mm-hmm.
social scientists, we're always trying to explain things how it is currently. And
Mm-hmm.
bringing the two together, then you can ask that community of women who you are trying to empower is that what is it that is needed for the mental model to shift from always depending on the permission from
Mm-hmm.
the eldest brother in the family to the point of the it is my right, therefore I shall not need to need anymore. So you're converting that invisible power to a visible power by giving them something else that they currently do not have.
Okay, that's very interesting. Yeah. Thank you. I'm really interested to see how the whole thing pans out in a real problem, and we very much look forward to Sabuhi's presentation.
Yep.
Thank you. It's very timely. You're on, Sabuhi. Thank you. I hope we have more questions to take up in the end, so please keep posting any of your questions in the chat and Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Asana, for organizing the whole thing, firstly. And thank you, Nazia, for an amazing theoretical background of co-creation and the framework. So I don't need to go there at all. So I'll just jump into the actual application of these tools and methods. So just to introduce myself, so I'm Sabuhi. As Nazia said, I'm a PhD student at the Civil Engineering Department, but Nazia is also my co-supervisor from the land economy. So you can see how I'm connecting within the departments, some social science coming in with the engineering field, which was much needed in my research. I'm basically from the Himalayan mountains in the North Pakistan, from Gilgit-Baltistan originally. So this is where the biases comes in that Nazia was mentioning. So I think this is very important before I start my presentation to also acknowledge that we, as scientists, we definitely have these biases towards the associations that we have already and the lived experiences we have. So I'm basically an architect, so a lot of things are inherited from that field also. And an architect coming to the engineering field, how that transition happened. So you will see how all those things come together as the background or of the whole the ideology that I have developed in my PhD thesis and the approach that I'm taking. So let me first share my screen and let me know when you see this.
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
although it's not in the presentation, if you wish to. Yeah, thank you.
is it now?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. So let me just take just my PhD. So basically, I'm working on investigating how we can reshape flood resilience planning and decision making and enhance it using systems thinking and co-creation methods in the context of Gilgit-Baltistan in the Himalayan mountain regions. If you are not familiar with context, just some buzzwords that are used for in media and all is that it's also called the third pole of the world because of the having the most ice cover outside the polar regions. And one of the things that is quite important to mention is the risk factor in the face of climate change. So the research shows that by 2100, within few years, not few years, but like 80, 90 years, most of the ice is going to melt, and which means the downstream regions, which includes southern Pakistan, India, and all the neighboring countries that Himalayan mountains basically feed into, they are on a quite high risk of these floods. And we have already seen this coming within past 5 years, how Pakistan has been affected by the floods. This is just a background of my PhD thesis here at the University of Cambridge. So I'll just start with an example of a small village in Hunza Valley, where a few years back, some government authorities started flood protection projects for these vulnerable villages, which were at risk of glacial lake outburst flooding, which is also called GLOF floods. So some engineers came and they started building these flood walls, which is a typical practice or the first response that we engineers do, right? We think about flood resilience and we build these walls. So that was the response. They were building these walls, and despite the warnings from the local communities, they blasted the big boulders which were holding the slopes. And in 2021, a big glacial lake outburst happened, and half of the village was swept away due to the diversion of the river, and because the slope was not stabilized enough due to the exploding the boulders. So this is just one example of various other examples globally, where we can see that how we approach flood resilience as a predict and control approach, with a predict and control approach, where we think that only technical solutions are enough, where we do these flood modeling, risk assessments, we try to identify the risks or the risk factors and do all these hazard mappings with the amazing technology that we have. And we try to control it with physical reinforcements. So this is kind of a focus on short-term fixes using these technical solutions. So another limitation here is that we look at these projects as siloed projects within a bigger system leading to an outcome, instead of looking at them as interventions in a bigger system, right? Which come together as parts of a bigger system, as interventions within the bigger system leading to an outcome. And thirdly, there is a sectoral silos where the local communities, the local authorities, the private sector, and the NGOs or the third sector, they are working in their own bubble without any knowledge sharing, as Nazia was telling you about, like the why we need to break these silos and need to co-create all these the understanding of risk also, and also the interventions. So even the approaches are totally different, they're siloed. So this is the third limitation that was identified in this research. So this basically leads to short-term gains, failures in adapting to and recovering from uncertain flood impacts, and it grows exposure of communities and assets. And imagine topping that up with all these different factors where we have poverty, we have critical damage to infrastructure. So all these cascading effects of disasters, and in a context which is quite a high risk in terms of climate change and impacts of climate change and disaster risks. So just to give you a background for those who don't know glacial lake outburst, it's like a tsunami in the mountains. In a narrow valley, a lake which is like formed because of the glacial melt, that basically bursts and it sweeps away everything that comes under. Due to the geography and the steep terrain, the speed of the floods is also one of the factors that creates a great damage. So these are a few things that we really need to know before we are designing any infrastructure system or talking about flood resilience itself. So this is where the approach comes in, where I identified that why systems thinking and collective action can basically work in this context. So just to define the flood resilience.
Sorry, Sabuhi. I think your network is breaking in between. I think we lost her.
Sorry,
Hello?
can you hear me now?
Yeah, but it's breaking in between. Would it help if you switch off the camera just to say?
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Okay, so one of the things that is extremely important before planning and decision making for flood resilience is how we are defining resilience itself. So in the context of Pakistan, the policy papers that I read and the reports by even the big NGOs like UNDP, who are working in the Gilgit-Baltistan on and they have launched this GLOF project. So when I went through all these documents and the reports, I could see that resilience was defined as a capacity of an infrastructure system to withstand only or resist to a certain impact. So it was not going beyond resisting. So there was no mention of recovery or adaptation or transformation, which is extremely important when we talk about this multidimensional concept of resilience. If there is no mechanism for recovery, then only withstanding is flood protection. It's not flood resilience. So we are confusing flood resilience with flood protection. That's the first thing that we need to understand. Secondly, resilience of what? So resilience on household level, on neighborhood level, on city level. So the scale is quite important to understand. The infrastructure that we are designing, so what is it basically building resilience for? On what scale? So sometimes in my research, I will show you further how this understanding of scale has also been ignored while designing the infrastructure systems. Yeah, and then resilience to what? So an engineer or a civil engineer or an urban planner, an architect, when they design something, we need to also understand for resilience, for designing for resilience, we need to understand what is the risk itself. So resilience to what? In the context of Himalayan mountains and the other mountain regions, it's all these connected hazards that we are talking about. So the earthquake happens, it basically triggers landslides. The landslides block rivers. It makes dams, and then the dams outburst. So it's all connected. This is also one way of, and this is also systems thinking is also very important in this case where we are talking about multi-hazard approach, where all these different hazards are basically interconnected. And this is where we also see the neglect of practitioners, where we only look at one hazard and we don't look at the others, which are interconnected. Sorry. Yeah, and resilience for whom? So as Nazia has explained it in detail about understanding the users or the actors or the people who we are basically designing for or building resilience for. So in this case, the direct stakeholders, the indirect stakeholders, I'll show you in the next slide how I have done this stakeholder analysis. So I'll not go into too much detail of this. So jumping into the system-based collective action, collective planning approach, which has foundations in the co-creation approaches that Nazia developed at the CRST Research Center. So the first thing here is recognizing diverse stakeholders, right? The second thing is developing the shared understanding towards the wicked problem, which is, in my case, or in this context, it's flood risk. So what are the different perspectives of risk? That is important to understand because, sorry, here. So if we just talk about the first stage, if we talk about the citizens or the local residents, what risk, what is the perception of risk, or how do they perceive risk when it comes to flood risk? So for example, some of them, when I did the interviews and the workshops with them, some of them identified how not getting paid the compensation by the local authorities after the disaster hits, that's the biggest risk that they find vulnerable towards. So, and then the government authorities, they have their own perception of risk. The NGOs have their own perception of risk. So this is quite important to understand. What are the diverse rationalities towards risk? And developing that with a shared understanding is what this method basically does. So first, it helps us identify the elements and connections and interdependencies within that complex problem. It helps you identify the leverage points within the system, and then it helps you also identify the understanding of stakeholder interests and capacities. So this is something very important before we go towards collective action. This is quite important to co-develop in the process of resilience building. And once that understanding is built, then basically it goes towards collective action, where all these stakeholders come together and basically co-create solutions based on the understanding that they had already built. Something extremely important that Nazia has also touched upon is the past, present, and future framework, which is built inside this into this framework. So basically, you are not just looking at the situation like we traditionally do, and we basically look at the present trends, and then we define solutions for that short term. In this framework, it basically starts with the situation or understanding the past and learning from the past, which is extremely important for resilience building. And it's one of the capacities which basically leads to adaptation and transformation in resilience. The second part is the present. So in the present, identifying the leverage points, the barriers that are basically creating hurdles, or the root causes that are basically built within the system. So once you identify that present and codifine those weakest links within the system, then it goes towards the future. So it's a whole package of past, present, future, which then leads towards long-term sustainability instead of short-term solutions. So in this framework in particular, it integrates flood resilience, which is the socio-ecological resilience definition of flood resilience, which is basically going beyond engineering resilience and understanding the adaptation and transformation capacities also, and taking those in consideration, and planning for infrastructure systems which can adapt and transform after the stress events. It also integrates collaborative planning, where basically grid group theory comes in, and the theory of complexity, where the systems thinking comes in. So I'll not go into too much detail of that. But yeah, so these three layers these three components of the framework are basically also creating the benchmarks for the analysis for once I collected the data. Basically, these are the three things that became the data analysis foundations, where the first layer, where the systems thinking layer, helped me identify the centrality, root causes, cascading effects, leverage points. The second part, which is very important, is using grid group theory. I was able to identify stakeholder values and interests, stakeholder roles, capacities, and level of interest. And the third thing is basically the current interventions and the future interventions that I will show you how we co-created with the communities. So the third layer basically helps you identify the coping mechanisms that are in place, the interventions and the resilience capacities, and basically how they lead to the outcomes that we have now. So I'll not go into too much detail, but I just wanted to show you that for this research, in the case study area, I did the almost 70 project-specific interviews, site visits of 25 valleys, villages, towns, and almost 13 system-based collective action workshops. Now, I really wanted to mention what system-based collective action workshops are and how significant they have been in this process. So, as I said, I have also worked as a urban planner and an architect in Gilgit-Baltistan, being from there. So, what I experienced earlier working with the NGOs and private sector is that when it comes to participatory or consultation meetings with the communities, what we do is we call all these community members or the stakeholders in a big hotel or a posh. We book up this posh hotel and then we do this whole day workshop with the communities, and then we call it a consultation, and then we tick the box of participation. We don't realize that the farmers who have farming to do, the fishermen who have fish to catch, or all these other stakeholders who cannot access those participation meetings that we have organized in these big hotels or in towns or cities. How are we calling it a participatory process? It's without understanding if people have resources, if they will spend their time and resources and come there. So instead of that tick box participatory method, I opted for system-based collective action workshops, which are basically one method within the co-creation methods, where basically I thought that it would be more significant to have these smaller workshops instead of big workshops and doing grand participatory consultation meetings. Going to these villages and doing individual workshops within these villages where the contractors could come in, where the public authority individual could come in, where the site engineers could come in, and the communities who experienced that flood recently or have experienced an infrastructure project happening in their village, they could come in and share their voices. So this has been quite instrumental because I could access the perspectives of each and every participant. It was more engaging instead of going to a big hotel and presenting a presentation by experts and introducing the experts and having it a one-way participation. This worked tremendously because within 2 hours, the way this method is designed is within 2 hours, you could actually identify you could actually co-create an understanding around the past, present, and then co-create for future. So in this process, I'm happy, and I'm also grateful to the communities who participated, and the site engineers and the local authorities, even the contractors, the politicians who were there, the activists, they all came in and contributed in this research. And we were able to identify 70 interventions within these 13 system-based collective action workshops. I'll tell you in detail what those were and how significant that has been. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I really wanted to share with my audience might be engineers or planners or architects who basically on daily basis they do all these participatory workshops with stakeholders. I wouldn't go into too much detail of this, but yeah, this is some detail of the framework itself, what questions it asks on all these 5 stages, starting with problem structuring, understanding the diverse perspectives within the resilience planning landscape, which I said, which is the present. And then developing the shared understanding of the wicked problem around the flood risk, and then going towards preparation, identification of undeniable opportunities and leverage points, and then going towards collective action and verification, validation and testing. So this is also a simplified version of what my workshop structure looked like. And one of the things that I found was that the issue here with resilience planning is not only how the infrastructure is designed, or it's not just a technical problem, but the issue is basically how resilience or how the problem itself is framed by different diverse individuals. So flood risk especially is perceived differently across stakeholder groups. So there is no single shared understanding of the problem, leading to different responses to risk. Communities are mostly in the Himalayan mountains. If you are familiar, you would know that we don't depend on rain for the vegetation. So there's a whole system, a very sophisticated system of water channels, which also historically became the drainage system, or the surface water drainage system. When it rained, we had all these fields where the water could accumulate and absorbed into the ground. But now, with the population increase and the growth of the villages and the towns, this is no more, I mean, it's not that functional, the community intervention that was in place. So we definitely need these interventions, but we need to understand how we are basically integrating the local knowledge with the expert knowledge. So yeah, so one of the things that is very important here to understand is how the risk is basically understood by these different stakeholder groups. And the thing about invisible and visible power that Nazia was just mentioning, it's very important to understand in Gilgit-Baltistan's context also, where if you see this diagram, you could see the green part is basically the decisions or the power structure on local level of the bureaucratic system, of the citizens, of the private sector and the civil society. So this is done on the grid group, using the grid group theory. You would know if you have used it earlier, or if you want to know in detail, you can also contact me. But this basically helped me identify on different scales how on local level, and then in blue you can see that there is this national level or federal system is coming in. So even for the NGOs like UNDP and Al-Khan Habitat, they have their national offices or headquarters, country headquarters in cities like Islamabad, let's say. And it's very important to understand the flow of decisions that is coming in. So usually the camp offices or the engineer who is on the local level would not have that much power or decision making power, even in terms of designing. So that's what I found out in my interviews and the data that I collected, that the local engineers, although they had great lived knowledge and their own expertise, they didn't have the power to design and take design decisions because someone else in the cities was consulted as an expert, and a one-size-fit-all design was being implemented in various different valleys. So that's also very important to understand the power structure here. And there are some invisible factors which are also power structures that are very important to understand here. Even in the public sector, you can see the CPEC project, especially in Gilgit-Baltistan. It has a great decision-making power and it definitely influences the decisions that we take around investments, around our budget and resource distribution. There are these international agendas like Sendai framework or SDGs that basically Pakistan has opted to and have signed these agreements with. But on the local level, we could see, is it actually having this trickle down effect or not? And then we have the Pakistan military rescue and relief teams, which have this invisible power. So the military aspect, looking at the geophysical and geopolitical significance of Gilgit-Baltistan, there is because it's sharing borders with more than 3-4 countries. So that power, that invisible power is also there. So yeah, with grid group theory, it was very useful to understand all these different ideologies within the private sector, NGOs, the public sector, and the citizens and the local authorities. This is just to show you because I'm pretty sure there must be a lot of engineers in these presentations who would like to see the detail, how I basically did the analysis. I'll not go into detail, but I just wanted to show you how most of the interventions that I visited or assessed are engineering solutions, which means either they are risk assessment studies or they are physical reinforcements. So these are just two examples of on the right side, there is this project by UNDP, GLOF project, where if you see this drawing here, and I also mentioned it in a conference recently, which was UN Assembly, that this particular drawing has been replicated in 10 different valleys without understanding the differences of the geography, of the context, the culture, socioeconomic layers. So how can we just replicate one-size-fits-all designs for this kind of context or ecosystems, where in some valleys there is debris flow, in others there is mud flow, in others there is sediment coming in others there is landsliding, in others. So each and every valley and each and every site has a different context. And without understanding that, even big agencies who are working in that region, they are replicating these one-size-fits-all solutions, which are mostly engineering flood protection solutions. But on the other side, we can also see that the power of local engineers, the lived experience. So one of the projects that I saw was in one of the valleys in Gilgit, Oshkandas, where a local engineer of Al Khan Habitat came up with the solution of ditch project. So instead of making a flood wall for a mud flow stream, they designed this ditch to basically contain the mud flow. And it has been resisting to last at least 3 seasons of floods, where at least it is resisting to these big, and mud flows. So you can see this is an image that was sent to me by the communities later after last year's floods, where it has contained the flood impact and it has saved the village. But there is another problem here. Who is doing the recovery here? Do we have a recovery mechanism? So even if we are withstanding the floods or the risk, we don't have a mechanism to recover. So when I talked to the communities, they said this is the NGO's job because they did that. And the NGO says this is the community's job and the public sector's job. So we don't have that mechanism, and it is still there. The water is still there. If this season the flood comes in, this is going to be a disaster again. So as I said in the beginning of my presentation, we are focusing more on resisting and withstanding with floods instead of understanding how recovery mechanisms can be developed in these areas. So even if we have local solutions, we don't have recovery mechanisms, then this doesn't qualify as a resilient infrastructure, because if we don't recover from the impact, then it's not in the resilience definition, it's protection. So these are the things that I really wanted to share. And the second part of the framework basically came up with, this basically was all developed by the shared understanding that we co-created in the workshops and the interviews, where we learned from the past. And this is what basically the output looked like, where you can see there's this iceberg effect, where on the surface, we see response and recovery, human institutional capacities, infrastructure efficacy, and understanding environmental risks and geophysical factors, which are connected to resilience stages. But we also need to understand the factors that are under the water or under the surface, which we cannot really see, but are very important enablers and disablers of these capacities, which will then basically lead to the effective flood resilience planning and decision making. So I'll just give you an example. For example, for the understanding environmental risks and geophysical factors, which is part of predict and understand risk proactive planning or learning process. So the risks are, of course, the environmental risks that we have, but it's very important to see that understanding the risk, availability of latest technology, inclusion of local knowledge is also very important for this, let's say, pillar. And it's all cross-cutting. And one of the things that is very important to see is the main value of this stage or this learning from the past is that a shift from symptoms to root causes. So just shifting from fixing the symptoms to basically fixing the root causes. And this is what basically the causal loop diagrams help you with, where you can identify the root causes within the big system. So this is a typical causal loop diagram that is created using systems thinking tools. And the data or the variables are all coming from the workshops and the interview data. So one of the root causes, if we see, are so they are the ones with the red border. So availability of recovery and adaptability plans, that's one of the root causes that is basically affecting the whole system. Awareness about disaster risk, access to grants and microfinance, decision-making power at local level, availability of financial resources. So you can see that, most of these root causes are not just technical. They are economic, they are institutional, they are social, like the level of accountability and transparency. So we have a big problem of corruption in the system, so that is also affecting the whole thing when it comes to infrastructure investment and planning. And then experts' knowledge of geophysical aspects of project sites. So this was also one of the root causes which led to failure of various infrastructure projects. And then you can use these feedback loops to understand the vicious cycles of, let's say the resilience investment. How is that driven? So with systems thinking, you can see how these cycles are basically created within the system. And by understanding these, you can see what is reinforcing a phenomena and what is balancing. So yeah, and then by identifying leverage points, one of the things that you can achieve is basically yeah, sorry, there's a typo, but this stage is basically, this matrix is showing which factors are basically the drivers. With the micmac analysis, this is what you can identify. What are the drivers? What are the dependents within the systems? So let's say if we talk about the drivers, we have regular supervision by experts. So investing into this, and by capacity building or by creating a mechanism where supervision by experts is ensured, this can basically drive better impact. It can drive a better change in the system. Instead of investing in the dependence, where we have, let's say, level of accountability and transparency, at this level, if we invest in that, yes, that can drive change, but it is dependent on various other variables where we need to fix the other variables, and then this one has to be changed. So we can see with this analysis, we can see which elements or which factors have more influence and less exposure within the system. So this is how we can identify where to invest and how to co-create our interventions. Yeah, and this can also enhance the decision-making power. It will show, let's say, if you take this to a minister or an NGO manager or a local authority and say, these are the drivers that came up after this, identification of the factors with the communities. So this is where we need to invest, and this is where we need to make a change to drive an impactful change. This is just a process of how this analysis was done. So the micmac analysis is basically the in-degree and out-degree analysis data that is used for that. So it's the exposure and influence. I'll just show you the top ones. For example, the accessibility of flood infrastructure has 11 in-degree, which means this element is influenced by 11 other variables within the system. So it means that it has more exposure to the impact of other variables within the system. So these are a few things that we
Can I
identified.
just interview
Yeah.
so, Ms.
Yeah.
Abuhi? So there was a question regarding these diagrams that you're showing. Is there a particular software that you use to develop these these
So
causal loop diagrams?
yeah, it's these are created in Kumu.
Okay,
Kumu
thank you.
software, KUMU.
Okay.
Sorry, I did my master's in Germany, and now I always say "oo" for you. So
No,
yeah,
that's actually very helpful. I'm sure a lot of people might be interested, to
yeah.
know. Yeah, thank you.
We
And may
can
I?
take questions. I'm just on my last
Yeah. Thank
final
you. Yeah,
slides.
that's the other thing. So if we have some 10 minutes left for the
Yeah, of
questions,
course.
that's very good.
So
Thank you.
the last part, once this understanding was built, learning from past and understanding the present. The future planning comes in where the co-creation actually happened. So once stakeholders understand the system, they move from narrow engineering responses to broader, more localized and long-term strategies for flood resilience. It's very interesting to see that if you see this pie diagram where I have distributed all these interventions on in the categories of engineering or technical resilience, ecological resilience, socio-ecological resilience. So currently, most of the interventions that I studied, 88% of them are engineering solutions. But when we did the co-creation within the workshops and the 70 interventions that we got, 65 of them are engineering. But you can see that how these are changing. So ecological resilience, currently we have 11%, and socio-ecological resilience, we have no intervention which can qualify on socio-ecological resilience. There was one plantation drive, but that also failed. So mostly non-existent. So you can see how in red, this is the 70 interventions that we co-created in the workshops, how they are more balanced on the resilience spectrum, which shows that we are not condemning the engineering resilience, but we are talking about an integration of these three elements or the three types of resilience where we have hybrid solutions, where the engineering solutions are integrated with the ecological resilience, where we have nature-based solutions, and socio-ecological resilience, where we have other solutions like institutional, economic. So it was very interesting to see the shift between how the expert-driven interventions leaned more towards engineering solutions and the locally co-created solutions were more balanced on the resilience spectrum. Yeah, this is just a distribution to show you how they were also on different scales. There is a variety of scale that you can see, whereas the expert-driven interventions were mostly on village level or, on village level. There were none on household level or on district level. So this is also very interesting to see that we towards end of pipe solutions instead of looking at solutions as interventions, like I said. So as a conclusion, a resilient flood infrastructure is not only about building better structures, it's about building better decisions. So co-creation methods basically help us, at least in the context of Gilgit-Baltistan, we understood that it cannot be understood through engineering alone. It is shaped by institutions, powers, finance, local knowledge, and uneven exposure to risk. This framework also offered a practical way to connect past lessons, present system pressures, and future collective action in one planning process. And then applying the framework showed that vulnerability is co-produced by social and institutional condition, not by hazard alone. The process helped surface different stakeholder views, identify leverage points, and make hidden barriers to coordination more visible. The framework is especially useful in remote, data-poor, high-risk mountain regions where standard planning tools are difficult to apply. So this is what helped us to move beyond short-term solutions towards a more localized and sustainable flood resilience building. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Abuhi. This is actually very, very complementing to the concepts and then the application. And it's exciting to actually see that, in oftentimes in engineering or fields, we try to segregate and silo different things, probably for our convenience and feasibility of really tackling the problem. But then it then leaves out these connections to what makes it really, interconnected and address the problem holistically. So this is a great way of then breaking those silos and then bringing back as much as possible that real picture of the problem and try to solve it. This is exciting. We have a few questions. Maybe we can, Marina and Namrata, if you would wish to talk, please unmute. There's one question in the chat that was, I think, directed to Professor Nazia. The question is, for many PhD research, it might not be feasible to do action research in its entire form. So the question is, what would be the best step of work to do, before the action research? I think it fits somewhere in between the table that you showed.
Yeah, no, very good question. And I think
Yeah.
that Sabui's experience is actually illustrative, is that you should come from the point of view is that what is impossible is only what we think it is impossible. I mean, if you think about Sabui's PhD project, it is an action research because she has done the foundational work as a academic where you have to add to the knowledge base to say, this is my value addition to this knowledge as a scholar. So you get that PhD. But the action base is actually creating that framework of outputs that these governments or the businesses, the NGOs or the consultancy firms can take on, which is no longer just one technical solution based, but a holistic understanding of the community. And I think that is the bit that we need to break out in our mind, is that yes, even as a PhD student, you can do an action research. How going out to those 13 site visits and getting the local authorities to come to those conversations is what often not done in a PhD projects or by students because they just feel a little bit less comfortable to do that. But the point where students like Sabui are empowered to say, no, it is your job is actually to get that voice. And once you get them together, the diffusion of knowledge happened right then and there. So the action was when she left, even though she extracted the information, came to Cambridge, did all the analysis, many of the communication that are left behind among the participants, they are now taking action in their own terms, how they want to, engage with externals when the new projects, budgets, and supports are coming into the region for additional flood resilience. So action research, once you go into it with that mindset, two things needs to happen. One, you are reducing the friction of people to talk with each other, in this case, authorities, because there is a little barrier in our mind. We feel that we cannot talk to them unless we have a really, really good reason. So you as a researcher break the friction. Then the fraction, and I would say you write this down because this is an useful framework that I use. The fraction is we all have fractional knowledge about the system. And once you bring them together, that fractional knowledge starts to be visible. And that's where you as a researcher can collate them, like Sabui has shared with you. And she got to, even though without being a social scientist, she can understand enough of the action on the ground to categorize them in a necessary way. And the third thing is the formulation. And the formulation is what the output comes out from her thesis. And that formulation, again, as an action researcher, when you do it with localized knowledge and experience, is so much more powerful. That is that invisible power you shift between the authority and the local people, who often do not get together in the way that Sabui mentioned. But when you do a 2-hour, very rapid engagement, very fun and fast way of engaging, then you break that mental silo. So I hope you can be convinced to do action research even as a PhD student. And yes, it is a lot of work, but I think Sabui at the end of the day, regardless what comes out of this, felt that she was rewarding the farmers, the fishermen, for not holding them out from their livelihoods for a whole day when they are very much, time constrained population of the society and most neglected.
Thank you, Professor Nazia. I hope that is helpful for not just the person who asked the question, in general for the research community. Thank you very much. There are a few comments. I think Namrata, would you like to go first? I think you have.
Thank you so much, Ashana. I really enjoyed both talks, and it's interesting what suggested about the how compact action research has been very useful and helpful for the community. So my question here, or rather a query, or I think I want to make it better, get a better understanding. When we start a research like that, after doing a few years of research, it is, of course, people are able to see, the community is able to see what's coming out of it. And once the output is out there, it's quite visible, most probably, that how important this research has been for them. But my point is, when you are starting, then what is it that either a PhD student or even a researcher in the preliminary stages of their research should do to make or motivate the people? Because this is something that's a feedback loop. You are continuously getting the feedback from the people. So what is it that the person, if for example they are working remotely, it's not possible for them to stay in the area for an entire 3 years or something like that, how are you going to keep that engagement with the community, with the people you are working with? I hope my question is clear here. Thank you.
So just to dissect a tiny bit, are you talking about as a professional researcher, or are you talking about a PhD or an academic research project?
I would say an academic research project, but it doesn't have to be at PhD level. It could be postdoctoral level, but as an academic, because often it's not possible to stay there for the entire period of time if it is away from the area you're doing the research. So that has been a problem to me. Hence, I'm just putting it out. Yeah, thank you.
So let me take this and I'll hand it over to Sabuyo as well. So let's have a reality check in the context setting, just to make this clearer. So I'm a professional academic researcher, right? My job is to do research, train on research, carry on doing research. And majority of the work that I do are done as a competitive grants, and we compete to get funding for this. From the design of research continuity has two critical variables. One is that it has to fit with the research philosophy and principle within which I am the scholar. And the second one, you need to have institutional support, whether it's money or whether it's a legitimacy. One of the three boxes that I showed you, that will then dictate that if I have both of those consistently available and I want to say carry on working on food security in Bangladesh, and that's the same thing on the other side, the recipient, they want to carry on working with Professor Nazia on food security in Bangladesh because they also have the two things available, the need, and they also have the funding or some kind of institutional condition within which that we become partner into this. So that is formal way of continuing research. And you will see, and we currently have projects where we've been running it for 9 years with our partners because those two conditions justified the ongoing relationships. But then when you enter into a research project where it is time bounded, funding limited, your personal interest is just only one of the third wheel into that, because those two other things do not justify or does not match for reasons that are there. You cannot necessarily carry on the research activity as a professional. Now, that's where the informal relationship comes handy with the community, because give you a very interesting example. I apparently have inspired and helped design another academic in China in 2021 to develop a research project, which they applied for grant. This morning, I get an email saying that that project got funded. 4 years after that conversation, and we never had a communication in between that. So that person actually copy pasted a large set of email and conversation to remind me that we had that conversation. So the informal connection in the research world is also quite common for professionals in a way to continue with the journey that you have got in. So again, I think part of it, the continuation with the community, in this case, it's a Chinese scholar community who I am inspiring to do action research. 4 years later, they win a grant, they come back, and then we will restart the conversation. So there isn't really a guidebook out there, but there are a couple of these models that you can take on board. But Sabui, as she has done this from Gilgit, maybe she can share how she wants to stay connected.
Thank you so much, Nazia. That was very, very helpful.
Thank you, Namrata, for an amazing question. I think it's very important that we understand this method as an iterative method where we basically go in cycles. So it's like a live model where it keeps updating. So that's very important to understand. And in terms of practicality, like the validation that we did in especially in my PhD method, where we had these validation interviews after the data analysis, and we presented to, of course, not all the 70 interviewers that we interviewed in the field, but connecting back to the communities. And let's say in my research, I could connect back to 20 of them. And technology also comes into play, where these farmers, let's say, or the remote areas where they don't have access to internet. So that those are the limitations. But still, I tried to validate the data that I had analyzed, and then getting the validation from them was extremely important. And then and by learning from that, going back to them maybe in some other capacity and showing them the results, sharing them is also very important. So I think this method is built for that. It goes in cycles, so it's not a linear process. So that's the beauty of this framework in particular.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Namrata, and thank you both. Marina, would you like to speak up?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nazia, and
Sabuhi.
yes, Sabuhi.
It's a difficult name.
I was not sure how to pronounce it.
No, I understand.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that what this first of all, we met with Nazia before, and I'm really excited with what you have shared today as well, because I think that this academic and professional humbleness of admitting to not knowing everything, and to be open to connect with representatives of different stakeholder groups, is truly fundamental and pioneering approach. And so I wanted, as I provided my question maybe succinctly in the chat, I wanted to bring the time dimension as well. Nazia slightly touched upon this topic as well, because we are, as researchers, limited with the duration of grants. We also, working with the local administrations, are rather often limited by their political cadence, or sort of the limitations of their time duration of their political power of people who are making the decisions. And in this case, I think that, first of all, in terms of ecosystemic approach, when you invite people from different stakeholder groups, including marginalized groups whose views are not taken into the considerations in the decision-making process very often, but they are maybe mostly impacted by the decisions which are made by the administrations on the local level and on the regional level. It's so important. And my question regarding the time was mostly focused on the notion that when we invite people who are truly impacted by these decisions and who are involved in the decision-making process, they take ownership and responsibility for providing the long-lasting effect of this project. And in this case, I would very much appreciate your thoughts on what might be done with our limited resources, time resources as researchers. What contribution and what ideas might be introduced in the research process in order to provide this sustainable, long-lasting effect, even after when we officially, formally finalize our research project. Thank you.
Thank you. And time is actually, as I said in my theory of change, is a big factor analysis. And that's also why, as you saw on Sabui's presentation, her analysis where she has taken past, present, and future as the benchmarking for the interviews and the data that she was collecting. So there's two parts of time that we need to think about. One is the time of the execution, when a decision is made and it gets executed. In her case, in the case that we shared with you, it is the flood resilience, and depending if it is truly a resilient or flood protection. So if it is a truly a flood resilience, then by the definition, we're committing the local community and the local authority also to be part of the decision making. So therefore, they have shared their risks, resources, individual household level resources into the global design, whichever kind of design that they're introducing. So during the time of execution, the shared pooled of risk and resources matched each other. So they have collectively engaged in a decision of what kind of design of a bridge or a dam that they want to establish. And that decision in the interview process, as you go through it, you would have asked, what if X happens? What would you do? And you ask the collective there to say, what would they do? Would the farmers come with their axe and then open up a bigger dam? Or would the fishermen come and populate the dam with fish so it can also create livelihood? All of this out-of-the-box strategy that collective will provide you then goes beyond the execution, which is the time that is outside the project time. So the two kind of time that we and that I teach my students and I philosophize within my theory of change has to be part of the resilience thinking. And that's why Sabui was saying is that we haven't thought about the recovery, because that recovery is not budgeted into the execution budget because they only paid for the bridge or the dam. They have not paid or cannot pay 15 years down the road when different type of shock has happened, which was not, conditioned within the design framework. Who's going to pay for that? So the collective engagement from the community is then takes you away from the execution time to the future time and the preparation. And if you have noticed in her diagram, she has an arrow that goes from future to preparation, which is where the questions comes in. What if X or Y happens? What preparation do we need to think about it now so that can be paid for in the future? So if you are clever business or a bureaucrat leader sitting into that group of population, you have the power, the visible power to draft the project proposal where you can benchmark some future potential shocks and put out X, Y, and Z budget needs to think about that kind of construction so that 15 years down the road, when erosion happens, the communities are not starting from a blank sheet. And that's called collective action framework, within which resilience is actually thought about through the time scale of capabilities that are available and the risk portfolio that is shared within the users. And the questionnaire and the way that methodology develops does offer you that kind of scale. And that's why another thing Sabui said, it is a living method, so that potentially you can go back and use the similar thing and carry on, cascading down the different time zones. I hope that addresses you, because it is a very tricky question, especially for social scientists, how to fold in time into a design thinking like this.
And also just a small point about the application of that that temporal scale that we are talking about. So when you build this systems model, like I showed some of the diagrams of my causal loop diagrams or the others, this basically becomes a live file also as a researcher or as a scientist, which you can always go back to. You can add more variables or take out the variables, and then see how with time the model itself has changed, and how the theory of change that Nazia was talking about, how new interventions have either changed it positively or negatively. So even as scientists or as a method, the systems models are very useful in that case, where you can keep updating them. So it's a live file also. It's a live document that you can keep updating and iterating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for that engagement. It's very helpful for everybody to know more about this. There's one remaining question from Iftikhar. I'm aware of the time, and I hope people are still staying because they're engaging with the topic, and this is really good to continue the conversation. But others, please feel free to leave if you have no more questions left. But I would give a chance for Iftikhar to unmute and speak before we close.
Hi, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you for the both presenter for a fascinating presentation. Hi, Prof. Nazia. So my question, due to the time, I will just try to minimize my question. I was thinking of most of our work when we do in a global South, we heavily depend on the theories that emerge or develop in the global North. I was wondering, throughout your experience in co-creation and action research, have you seen an example where new theories or framework that emerge from the Southern perspective or the knowledge system? And if so, what we can learn from those experiences?
Thank you, Iftikhar. There are so let me break down your perception a little bit. So I'm a citizen and a resident of a global South country, so is Sabui, and we are working in this theory of change. So to begin with, we are one of those who are consistently trying to break that kind of perception bias that the methodologies that are used in global South are not actually developed by people from global South. Now, unfortunately, we are both living in the Western countries, but that does not mean that the mindset has changed. And that's why I shown you the first bias image, trying to understand where the scientist or the scholar come from as their background can give you an indication how much of the mental model of that individual actually baked into the method or the innovation they have put out. Amartya Sen, Nobel laureate, Amartya Sen, also a professor from Cambridge University, later he's at Harvard and now back here. He's a man from Global South. His work is all dedicated to Global South. His work has influenced many of the development policies and projects in the Global South. So I'm not comfortable to say that there is a straightforward dichotomy in that. But where you can draw that dichotomy is actually on the pricing model and the application of those theory when they get applied into the field, because someone has to pay for it for the purpose of keeping the project live, because the grant money comes in or an investment comes in, pays for the execution, but then survival of that project is where you need to have a monetary model behind the scene, a business model, whether it's a 100% recovery or 20% recovery. That's a kind of a business decision that gets made. And that's where you can create a dichotomy into neoliberal approach to project pricing and recovery of the investment versus more social or non-neoliberal version of the project pricing and recovery so that the project can sustain. And you can see lots of case studies and examples throughout the development studies and economics literatures where they will pile evidence as to where those kind of model has created more equal, fair distribution of value versus where it has created inequality, deepen the inequality. And that's something that I think where the distinction comes in the application, if that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
With that, I think we are at the end of our Q&A. Thank you. I wish both our speakers all my gratitude for agreeing to do this presentation and engage with the audience even through this extended time. And I think there might be more questions on this topic. It's very vast. So if it's okay for you both, may I invite the participants to reach out if they wish to connect with you or learn more about the methods and engage with their work and get guidance from you if at all required. That might be very, very helpful.
Yes, please send a group email out to the participants and
Okay,
CC both of us. So we will be happy to be in touch. We
that's
want
great.
this community to grow. So thank you for inviting us to your
Thank you very
platform,
much. And
Asana.
we ourselves hope to engage more with our research collaborations in the future. And to the participants, thank you very much for being with us even at 1:20. And this will be our last webinar for this year, this academic year under the chair series. And we're very happy that we got to engage with Professor Nazi and Sabuhi on this one. And I thank Zaishang Lee, my colleague, for managing the hosting with me today. And to the audience as well, we are starting the new series in September next year. So please stay tuned on our website. We'll be updating more information soon. And if you also wish to participate by presenting your work, please do reach out to us and we can arrange for multiple sessions where we do engage with participant presentations. Thank you very much, and I will leave you with best wishes for the summer holidays and see you again in September. Thank you, Professor Nazia and Miss Sabuhi, one last time.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Thank
all.
Thank you,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.